Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
You are watching Conversations with Jennylyn, and today I have the privilege of interviewing yet another fascinating, accomplished gentleman. My guest today is Dr. Markus Hosang, and he is the managing partner of BioMed Partners in Switzerland, and he has had some affiliation with the Silicon Valley and California specifically when he came here to attend Standford University. Additionally, he has worked with some biotech companies here in the US, and it's not my place to tell you his story. He is here to tell you himself. Dr. Hosang, thank you for allowing me this time to interview you.
Thank you so much, Jennylyn. It's a great pleasure to be here. Wonderful, being able to talk to you a bit about my my history in general, and also with regard to my affiliation, yes, with the Silicon Valley, but also being here in this nice place, Sand Hill Rosewood. I'll tell you later why I happened to come here. So it's a pleasure. Please shoot. I look forward to hopefully interesting discussions and questions which you bring up.
Well, I was remiss. I meant to say, as a part of my introduction, that this interview is now happening at the Rosewood Hotel on Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park, a very beautiful hotel with a great ambiance. And so, Markus, I'm very grateful that you have consented for us to come here and do this. Now tell me, what is Markus doing these days?
Okay, so I'm what you would call a VC, a venture capitalist in the life sciences area, and I'm doing this since about 17 years. Background-wise, I'm a PhD, I'm a scientist who did active research initially, and as you just have mentioned before, had the privilege to come to Standford Med School already as a doctor to do a kind of a postdoc in neurosciences. So that was my first first reason why I fell in love with the area, and why coming here is almost like a little homecoming almost every year, because after my postdoc I not only fell in love with the area, but I also had very good affiliations with my former advisor, a famous professor, Eric Schutter, in the life sciences field. And we had the tradition for almost 30 years now that after each and every JP Morgan Global Healthcare Conference, which is the actual reason why I came here this year and last and the year before, that subsequent to that JP Morgan meeting, I usually come down here to see how the campus Stanford is growing, and also visited with my very dear professor and friend, whom I have been seeing now for quite some time. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years from now, so we didn't do the dinner which we normally did, but it is wonderful to come here, and as I said before, the Sand Hill Rosewood anyhow keeps and treats you well, so it's a great pleasure to come here every year.
Well, I am very happy that we have the privilege of enjoying your company at least once a year, those of us who encounter you when you come to the Silicon Valley. Now tell me, Markus, you worked for a few US companies. Would you like to tell us which ones they are and what you did for them?
Yes, thank you, Jennylyn. Yes, after having had this exciting postdoc experience at Standford Med School, I joined a major pharmaceutical company over in Europe. You may not know it so well name-wise, but it's a very important company called Roche. And I worked as a scientist there. I built up vascular diseases research, and then got promoted into global R&D management. I was reporting directly to the president of global R&D and help him organize the R&D world within Roche at that time. And one of the first assignments, now I can talk about it in hindsight, is that my boss, the president, together with the CEO, they got the mandate to explore the acquisition of Genentech, local Genentech here. And I was a very early member of the due diligence, secret list, and helped evaluate secretly Genentech, which subsequently was bought by Roche, and this is, South San Francisco Genentech, which in the meantime, of course, became a very, very important part of Roche. That's no secret. We see it, very important originator of new medicines for the Roche complex. They also play an important role for the American market in terms of marketing. And I was involved in keeping a good collaboration between Roche and Genentech. Roche initially had bought 100% of the shares of Genentech, sold a part of it again, and for that reason had to do a kind of an arm's length relationship with them in order not to put other shareholders under certain untoward conditions, which meant that we had to organize the process very carefully. But suddenly, after my initial postdoc, I was back in the area now at the more senior level with regard to Genentech. And subsequent, yet another homecoming, a few years later, Roche acquired Syntex, Palo Alto, and I was involved in actually leading one of the acquisition teams, and had a major responsibility for some people here. So there was another reason for my coming back here. At that time, it was then called Roche Biosciences Palo Alto, over in the foothills, so not far away from where I was. So yet another good reason to come here. And last not least, as I mentioned before, also the fact that after each and every JP Morgan conference, I attended about 25 of them. I came back here every January, right after JP Morgan, so that was another contact point. Last not least, and then I've almost ended my series, is I love playing golf and staying here or being kind of an old quasi-professor of Standford. I usually play a round of golf on the Standford golf course, which is also great to do. I even shot a hole in one there, and my son once said, Daddy, you're probably, you didn't leave a big footmark at Standford Med School, but at least a hole in one, that was something which you can see now on the clubhouse wall, for the hole number 8, I think it was.
So when are you going to play with Tiger?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. No, it's a fun place to be, and sometimes you meet the celebrities, happens to be that in your flight, suddenly you have some important people you talk to, play with, and then suddenly find out they have a track record. And I even had, I think, a celebrity once in my flight without realizing at the outset. So that's an additional piece of fun, absolutely.
So Markus, thank you for holding my microphone.
I love to do that.
What made you decide to return to Europe?
That's a good question, because indeed, as a young postdoc there, working in a highly competitive field, I had an opportunity at that time to join young Genentech. Some other alumni from my group had done it before, and we stayed here, my wife and I, for a bit more than 2 years. So yes, indeed, the question was I going to join there or go back to Switzerland? And it took us a time to reflect. By the way, our son was born here, so he's a true Standford baby, American citizen. But then we decided to go back. I was more going back towards, big pharma back in Switzerland. And at that, we were not sure at that time, how the American educational system would be. There was more the question of busing. Palo Alto was super. Other communities were less good school-wise, so we didn't have a good feel at that point in time how this would work out. But it was more personal reasons.
Okay, so now that you're back in Europe, how do you compare your work experience there to how the attitudes and the work environment here in the US? And be honest.
Okay. Well, of course, that's a very good, very, very difficult question, multifaceted. But yeah, I have the privilege of having had, contacts time and again to compare the two, not the two worlds, but, the two areas, largely speaking. By the way, before becoming my own independent manager of a fund, after Roche, I worked with Roche almost 20 years, and 2002, when I left Roche, it was to join a major US venture capital firm, yet another contact point into the Bay Area, because they had their offices in Boston and South San Francisco, and that group still is called MPM Capital. So I had the exposure not only to Europe, but also to US investments, global investments. They at that time had raised a $1 billion fund, biggest life science fund ever, and I managed their European office in Munich. And from there, I was traveling like crazy. They loved me, certainly the airlines loved me a lot. But it gave me a good exposure, a good feel into the US and also Europe. But now to answer your question, there are clearly differences in our area with regard to, let's say, not innovation potential. Europe has a good innovation potential, but in terms of resources, money being available for investments, and here clearly, the US are still ahead in terms of magnitudes and also in terms of availability of human capital, experienced people who have done it before and do it again. And by the way, one of the challenges Europe has is if someone fails, then that's more of a problem than kind of of a sign of some success. So while in the US you have a number of entrepreneurs who recycle, even if they haven't been very successful in the previous company, they get opportunities, we give them a track record, while in Europe, having failed with a company is still a bit of, not a stigma, but certainly not an advantage. So in that regard, Europe is also a bit behind.
May I interrupt? Do I take it then that you've never failed?
No, that's not true. No.
Okay.
So no, that's very not true. No. I have, and certainly in my Roche life, I have failed twice miserably. I had a wonderful drug which Roche was going to put on the market. It healed rats. And rats, yeah, it was kind of a... That's exactly the point. What I'm telling you is Roche had a big compound there, very competitive market to go into, kind of a blood pressure lowering agent, and my group found out in a rat experiment that was also going to prevent restenosis after PTCA or cabbage. Wonderful data. And our marketing department was prepared to do a big, because it was safe as a drug, a big human study in post-PTCA patients, when, you know, the vessels clog. Yes. And this was my area of expertise. We had published, we had patents, all that. Make long story short, 2,000 patients were treated, and here was verum, here is placebo, no difference. Make long story short, men are not rats, we know that, and the animal model is not always predictive, in as much as while the rat had just one enzyme which we inhibited, the humans have two types of enzymes, so while we blocked one enzyme, the other was still happily working, and we thus did not block the kind of the pathological process.
But
that was one failure.
Able to identify the cause of the failure.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a scientific, failure in that regard, yes. But these are one of the experiences which I take along, which I also tell my colleagues, watch out, animal experiments are not always predictive.
That's right.
That's one of them which hurts me a bit. In addition, 100 million Swiss francs went into it.
So Markus, you are now someone who is spearheading a VC firm in Switzerland, putting it in American terms. Yes. How many incubators or companies are currently under your care?
We have a number of little boats which run with our gasoline, with our money. Historically, our fund team started in 2002. That's when I joined them, when I became one of the managing directors. And we have been entrusted, provided with money, resources from Swiss banks, even from European banks, although Switzerland is not part of the EU, from pension funds, from endowments, from private persons. And altogether, I have currently, together with my small team of partners, colleagues, we are about half a dozen, we have about $400 million under management. And those, thank you. And those $400 million up to now have gone into a bit more than 50 companies. We have sold many, and we have brought to IPO, listed a number of them. Oh, by the way, we have listed a formerly Austrian company on Nasdaq last April. Thank you very much. I can disclose the name, Hukipa Biopharmaceuticals. They do a very exciting vaccine for virals and cancer. Awesome. And I was now, for the first time in my life, I was invited to ring the closing bell at Nasdaq, which was a specific experience, yes. See your picture out there on the wall of Times Square was fine. So that's one exit path, bring companies to the stock market and then they be able to sell, or else, and that's of course my favorite preferred business model, is that we sell companies to big pharmas or also big medtechs. We have some medtech companies also in our portfolio, but our majority, our strong, let's say, area is pharmaceuticals, biopharmaceuticals, where we are really experts, our team, and also with a network of experts, consultants whom we call in.
That is so impressive. Now, I know that this is on a much larger scale in the US because they have access to more money, as you have indicated earlier. So since resources aren't flowing like apparently it is in the US, how do you decide which companies you are willing to invest in? How long does one have to impress upon you that they are investable, if that's a word?
Oh, that's a super question that really touches at the core of our, let's say, a bit business model or modus operandi, as we say. There are about 2,500 to 3,000 biotech companies in Europe, and I think we, over time, have seen most of them. Technically, about 500 companies a year approach me or our colleagues, or some of them I approach, like up at JP Morgan, Global Healthcare, or the Biotech Showcase. I sort them out. So we see, let's say, altogether about 500 companies for the first time, or in repeated times. We sent them back 2 years ago. They come back, say, we have now this and that. Are we okay? Are we eligible? Out of those 500, we invite for formal presentations between 50 and 70, so 1 to 2 per week, we as a team. And then we look at them. We start, calling in advisors, because while, I really can talk about, I would say, the pharmaceutical universe reasonably well, it's at a very, very thin layer.
Yes.
So if we dive in, we need experts to call, the most recent cancer, XYZ, pathway, strategy. We need to sort that out with really experts whom we call in from academia and elsewhere. And then we go stepwise in there. And of course, the hope is that we really find, the raw diamond, and at the end of the day, at the end of the process, which means substantial due diligence, we have to analyze patents. We have to build up a syndicate. We never do an investment by ourselves. It's always groups of investors, because there's just too much money needed and too much risk. So we want to share both, the burden and also the checkbook, so to speak. But out of those 500, technically about 4 to 5 a year, about 1% we invest. That's also the rule out in the industry. If you talk to my American colleagues here at Sand Hill Road, it must be probably a similar ratio. And then, of course, we hope, we work hard, we cross the fingers that something comes out. We always go on the board of directors of the companies. Even right now, I'm the chairman of the board of 2 companies, which I do not like to do as an investor, but sometimes I'm being just called in. So we work actively with them. In the worst case, 10 years.
Wow.
The longest company I'm in is 15 years now, and it just went IPO 2 years ago, so they took more than the usual 10 years. Our fund life cycle is 10 years and some prolongation, so within those 10 years, normally we have to really, bring companies to fruition, sell them, and return the capital back to our investors.
Well, I've interviewed other VCs on my show, and I've interviewed someone from an angel capital firm. So I understand the difference between the two. I'm going to ask you a question that you might not like, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Okay. Do you generally restructure the companies because you're financing them? Because that's the reputation that VCs have. That once they put their money in, you sort of lose control of your vision, and you sort of have to go with their program. Are you guilty of that same crime?
I think it's you paint a bit black and white. Let's see that it's different scenarios. I guess that's what you're referring to. Right. There is, on one hand, we go in. The team has a business plan, and they tell us this can easily be we need $50 million to bring the product up to clinical trials, so-called phase 1 and 2, to produce biologicals. I tell you, if you have to produce biologicals only for research purposes to do a clinical trial, it can cost you $5 million easily. So we have a clear plan which we agree together with the founder, with the team, and we say we finance this plan. However, there are certain situations. For instance, the lead program doesn't bring what we were all expecting. Or else we find out also that maybe the CEO, founder CEO frequently, while he or she is wonderful at the outset, suddenly we see that we need to bring somebody else in. So yes, we do sometimes have to change programs, stop one asset, although the founder would love to do much more basic science on it, but it didn't bring what we needed with regard to this becoming a developable, drug. That's the goal. We're not financing research. We finance, product development. At the end of the day, we want to make a difference and have a product on the market through our hands, mostly through the hands of a big pharma partner. Because don't forget, developing a drug costs about $2 billion, which I cannot finance. So we just finance the first part. But if it doesn't work out on that path, then we have to cut do new things. In the worst case, if we cannot finance because the whole collapses, we have to close companies. I had failures there in that regard too, back to your question. I had to, with a crying eye, I had to close one company, which I thought science-wise was good, but I could not finance an alternative program. So am I answering your question? I'm not sure.
You are answering
Okay.
the question now. What type of competition do you have on the European market as an investor?
You mean competition among investors, or you mean with regard to, let's say, the science out there?
No, investors.
Investors. You would be surprised. I would love to have more competition. We do not have enough groups. We do not have enough groups of our quality in Europe. That's one of the reasons why we don't have maybe enough monies or fund around to really fund everything. In Switzerland, we're only, well, Switzerland is not big, geographically or people-wise, but a very important, hotspot for innovation. Don't forget Roche, I mentioned before. Yes. And Roche is the owner of Genentech, just for the American people to know. Genentech is not owning Roche, it's Roche. Novartis is in Basel, that's where I come from, we're located. And these are, two world companies. So we have opportunities there, but even with that, we are 2 or 3 fund groups in Switzerland who do what I do. My team, we are one of the more important ones, even in Europe. In Europe altogether, we have maybe 20, 25 groups of my caliber. That's why, by the way, some American funds now, more and more, from overseas, come into Europe, Switzerland in particular, to tap innovation, which sometimes is a bit, less expensive, quote unquote, and at the same time needs capital, so they find opportunities here. So we could need more investors of our type. BioMed Partners, or the fund family is called BioMed Invest. And as I said, we invest out of 3 funds right now. Every 5-6 years you have to start a new fund because you're not allowed to invest new things out of an ongoing fund.
So that answer scratches my next question, because the next question I was going to ask you is, have you ever passed up on a company because they failed to capture your attention at the elevator pitch, where they usually engage you, and then your competition picked them up and they were successful?
Oh, wait. You have the good questions. Yes. I have missed opportunities, absolutely.
You have?
Absolutely, yes, in hindsight. But, you cannot, not each and every diamond, really, you're supposed to find it or nugget, whatever. So yes, I have, and 1 or 2 I do regret. However, having said that, I also am happy that I passed on 1 or the other, which my colleagues sort of went into, wholeheartedly, and I said, it doesn't smell right. And in hindsight, I was right. So yes, I have missed opportunities, but I've also, some of the missed ones were okay to be missed.
That's awesome. Now, I know that you don't invest in American companies. Your monies are just for European companies. I know that fact about your organization. Now, apparently the FDA in the United States it's tough. And so a lot of the products that are manufactured and created in Europe are on the market sooner than they get on the market here in the US. Is that an advantage to you as an investor?
That's a very good question. On the medtech side, and we also invest in devices, medtech devices, there for quite some time it was easier to get access, on the European side and get market approval. However, my quote-unquote companies on the biotech, biopharma side is always the goal, almost always to go not only EU, and get commercial approval, but also do an FDA. So I sent my companies very, very early on, even at research stage, over to the US, to the FDA, and oh yes, you get scientific advice meetings. So it may not be very in sync, sometimes it's also costly, but within a short time after starting in Europe, we also seek development paths, which takes 10 years, as I said, in the US. What is important now these days is a third column comes in, and we have to take note of that, and we learn this is China. There is a China FDA too, which now we have to take in mind, because some of the markets, liver disease, cancers, are huge in China, and we have to have a policy on that regard too. Yes, absolutely. But we're not doing just for one region, because if you want to partner our compounds with someone, big, like a Roche as an example, and I'll give you some examples of companies I've sold successfully, then we have to have a global strategy. And if we say, oh, we only do Europe, we have no clue what it takes over on the US side, and we have never talked to the FDA, we are already more on the, let's say, on the loser side.
So now you say you do have some of your clinical trials done in China. Did I hear you correctly?
We at least have to have started strategy, and yes, we are now in the process of doing for medtech and also pharmaceuticals, develop strategies to do in China, and yes, we're starting clinical trials in China. It's a more recent thing, but we have to get used to it, and all the American investors too.
Because, we hear all these, I've read of some articles where they push the envelope a little bit. Aren't you concerned about that?
You mean the Chinese, for certain purposes?
Yes, in some areas.
Okay, I do. Yeah, of course. Oh, of course. I know what you referred to. There were some very kind of coarse exaggerations in certain of the genetic engineering fields.
Yeah,
but this was more I would call it hopefully a scientific glitch. This was not under kind of any pharmaceutical programs and jurisdictions. And scientists sometimes they can be a bit loose cannons there. That's what happened. I think that's what you referred to with this Chinese fellow, which is absolutely unacceptable.
I know, and I have so much respect for all of you people, all of the geniuses in the world who are coming up with treatments for the different diseases. I mean, I think it's amazing what's transpiring now in the world in terms of development for cancer treatments and all the AI, work that they're doing and making a difference in the world. However, there are a lot of egos at play, and you can't deny that to be a fact. Everyone wants to be the one who's leading on the cutting edge, and I think there are times in your life when you can't cut corners and you can't push the envelope. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I do agree. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes you have to feel, not cut corners, but you can maybe accelerate certain programs, trying to be smarter than others. Sometimes it works, sometimes you fall on your nose. Of course, we have the mandate to do what we call, value creation. We have these terms, inflection points, get to the next clinical data point, and this we try to do with as little capital as required. I do not have, let's say, the breadth or the means to run 7 exploratory programs in parallel as I was used to do at Roche when I was heading development in Basel, when I had, big budgets. So we really have to focus with the danger that it doesn't work out sometimes, or else we cut the corner too much and then it falls on our feet, because we have missed points, and had we added 100 patients more or done a bit longer study duration, which all costs money, as you can see, we might have done it. So there is a bit of a risk, but not cutting corners in a malevolent way. It's more of trying to be smart, be fast, be cost effective, which sometimes means you're just missing the point.
And I know that everyone wants to be the one who came up with the drug to cure cancer, or the drug. Everyone wants to be on the cutting edge. There's an ego at play in every single person. So I would imagine a bunch of brilliant heads together. It's almost unavoidable. It's inevitable that egos will be playing a part, because you want to be the one to say, our company brought the first drug on the market to cure cancer. How do you, in Europe, stay on the competitive edge? Because I'm sure you want to be one of the leading, and you have led in some areas with different devices and drugs. How do you stay on the competitive edge?
It's a good point. As I mentioned earlier, I think in terms of innovation potential, Switzerland certainly, Europe, more generally speaking, is very good. I mean, we have excellent basic science. I mean, by the way, the school where I come from, the Federal Institute of Technology of Switzerland, called ETH, I think worldwide is the best in Europe. I don't know, second to Cambridge, I think, but ranks among the top 10 universities worldwide. So we have excellent innovation potential. We have the proximity to the the big pharmas who spin out people, drugs. But sometimes it's just that there's not enough development experience around. That's why we kind of lag behind sometimes. And as I mentioned also, we sometimes do not have all the, let's say, the capital available to really move. But there is, I would say there is, there is good substrate on the certain innovation side. The translation into products, I guess that's where, as we need more experience and more also gasoline sometimes. But I have a known track record, if I may give you the example. I mean, occasionally, that's very rare, occasionally you really have hits. And I'm very happy to have in my record a triple hit in as much, I'll tell you if I may. Yes, and this was a small biotech company, Glycard Biotechnologies in Zurich, coming out of ETH, by the way, and they had developed a technology to improve the potency of monoclonal antibodies. These are these antibodies which home in on, a breast cancer tumor cell, like Herceptin or others, and they have developed a technology to improve the potency, the grip of these antibodies, and they were smart enough to use a then very important product of Roche, which was already on the market, which has an important role in lymphomas. Very good drug. And they showed to Roche at the research stage, hey, Roche, we can improve your antibody medicine by a factor of 3 or 4. Please take note. And if you're a Roche, you can do 2 or 3 things. You can partner with the small company. You can just ignore them. Or in the worst case, Machiavellistically, you can buy them and destroy them because they're very close to your main asset. By the way, the compound is called Mabtera rituximab. It makes about $7 billion sales these days. Roche was smart enough to look at the company. We had just financed it together with some other investors. 20 million Swiss francs went in. We had a share of that. And Roche said, we're going to buy the company at the outset. We take them in. So they bought the company. So after 2 years of investment, we had a wonderful return. They paid more than 250 million, if I recall, 2 years later. So we returned money to the investors. But now comes the other. 10 years later, with several hundred million Swiss francs invested by Roche, Roche has a product on the market. It's called Gazyva. It makes 2 billion, and it's the little antibody which comes from my company. So we have a product on the market. Awesome. And I just listened to the CEO of Roche up at JP Morgan. They have great hopes that this Gazyva or Gazyva, I'm not doing a commercial for them, it's doctors who do it. I'm not allowed to do that. No, but scientifically, this is, everybody can see. And this is a product which comes out. And the third wow for me is that this small group of people, then there were 20 people when they were bought by Roche 2005-06, so it's a couple of years ago. They're in the meantime a unit. They left them independent in the same place. It's a unit of 250 people. They do the whole antibody engineering for the Roche Genentech group, and I have helped create workplaces, 200 about.
Congratulations.
So that's a triple hit, which happens very rarely.
Awesome.
But that's what also makes me feel good, particularly to do something for patients. Another company which I founded and sold to GSK is the source of an Ebola vaccine, which is now being tested in the current epidemics.
Wonderful.
So I try also to make a difference and help a bit in the background.
And I must ask you this question. You worked with people in the United States because you worked with pharma here in the US, and now you manage your own investment firm in Switzerland. What is the attitude, and don't lie, of American staff versus the people you work with in Europe? And you're turning red, so I'm getting the answer before you opened your mouth.
No, watch out. No.
I'm serious. What is the attitude like? Is there a big difference?
There is a difference in attitudes, that's for sure. As I said, I think we have good science on both sides. We have clearly certain attitudes which are different. I think over in the US, they're frequently bolder. They're better at selling themselves, including their companies. So if you start digging a bit, then you see that maybe not everything is, as it's being presented. While sometimes over in Europe, they still have to learn to really present, to pitch themselves. They teach them now. The young guys, they teach. I have now 2 small companies where I have even, women, which is wonderful, as CEOs. Postdocs, they turn into CEOs, and they're being, they're teaching, how to deal with us venture capitalists. So they start, but it will take a few more years. We're still lagging behind the US. So then I think we need a bit more to educate, and young people need to be a bit bolder. But the Glycard case I mentioned before were 2 young guys. they overnight also became millionaires. They stepped out of a postdoc, formed a company, were well coached. So you can do it, but there are differences in attitudes, in boldness, and also certain backgrounds. But I would say both models are okay. I'd like to be even a bit more solid and not oversell. I think if you oversell, I'm not saying that the Americans do that, but sometimes they sell a bit borderline. That may not always be helpful.
Okay, so what is next for Markus?
Well, you ask all the good questions.
Sorry, could you hold this? We were going to come back to this question, but one of the reasons I do this show is to motivate people, especially if they're from a lesser socioeconomic background, that shouldn't just play a part it shouldn't be the reason that you're not successful. And so what I like to do when I interview people like yourself is to ask you, what drives you? How did you get to where you are today? Apart from all of the hard work, you clearly loaded yourself up with all the weaponry, but in terms of education, and you did the work you needed to do to be skilled enough to do what you do today. What is next for you, and how did you get to this place in your life?
Thank you. That's a tough question. I was also would have been able to become a doctor directly. That was one of my possibilities, but at that time I wasn't too much into medicine, caring for patients directly, hands-on. So I went into biochemistry. I always had a curiosity. I wanted to understand, how things are going, understand disease processes. Yes. And I said at one point in time also want to not only be a researcher, but become more of a manager, which I have, stepwise done. I'm within Roche, doing research and then doing global R&D, then doing head development. So I've seen all the aspects of life cycle. I even helped a pilot at that time within Roche, personalized medicine aspects. So I've seen it all, and this was exciting. So I'm still curious. I like to, understand, see the things, and then clearly with an ambition to help, but also, let's be honest, as a venture capitalist, also to make money, but shouldn't be for the money purpose only. So I have this package of, motivation, of discovering, putting into whatever products, helping patients, but also make money at the same time. So what I'm doing is a big privilege, because people who know you, they tell you, okay, I believe in you. Here is 1 million, which I'm gonna, commit over the next one. I have many friends. I did not solicit. They came to me and said, "Can we invest in you?" And then I said, "If you wish, please do." So that's kind of a certain reward. And in that regard, I think I was lucky. There were a number of good steps which helped me get there, and started also out with Professor Shooter at Standford, who was really sort of, helping me getting set up in that world scientifically, and then very good advisors in Roche, including the president of R&D, who pulled me up. So I had some very good circumstances. But, going ahead now, going forward, I should say, is I'm at the stage now where I will just be raising number 4 fund. Every 4 or 5 years, 5-6 years, you have to raise a new fund. And as you may see with my hair, I'm not 30 years old anymore. No, more than 32. No, it's more about the number of hairs. So now what I'm saying is, I will ask my colleagues to sort of move on, and I may not be part of the next fund. I will still look for my boats for the companies of which I'm responsible. I'm currently on the board of about 6 or 7 companies, so those I will look after. But my younger colleagues will have to, be lined up and raise the next fund of 100 to 200 million Swiss francs. I'll help them in the background, but I will not stand in the forefront, which I'm currently still doing.
So now that I had you do my job and hold my microphone,
See?
I will take it back from you.
I hope I did it properly.
You did. Thank you so much. But I just have these questions that I'm not sure you're going to want me to ask you. But I will ask you anyway. Would you ever consider moving back to the U.S. to work or do business in the United States?
I think now, maybe 10 years ago this question would have been maybe more appropriate, but now I think it's probably would be too late. I'm also with my family situation and all that. I'm now at the stage where probably my kids will be moving around and I may be visiting them, yes, but not the other way around. I probably will not leave. As I said, My professional career has worked out very nicely. I'm very grateful to that, but there is no further step which I probably can or should do. And in that regard, US may not play a role. But I'll come here, back to this place here, JP Morgan, for the next couple of years for sure.
Thank you, Markus. Now, tell me what it was like for you when you were a young man who came to the United States to attend school at Stanford. What was that like growing up in Switzerland? I know it was a different time, so I'm very interested to hear your answer, what it was like moving from Switzerland to Stanford. Back in what year was that?
Oh, okay. Now I disclose my biological age a bit more, but doesn't matter anyhow. It was I was here at Standford from 81 to 84 as a postdoc. So I already had a PhD title from the ETH, and I had several opportunities because I graduated very well, I may say, from ETH, so I had several offers. Even an offer from the East Coast, a famous professor who subsequently got the Nobel Prize, but I declined because I said I want to come here. I think I knew the area from before as a tourist. I had been to the US before. During my PhD work, I spent half a year with the horse people in Kentucky. That was my first experience. But I said, it doesn't have to be Kentucky again. So I was looking forward to coming to California. And California was a wonderful time we had. My wife and, as I said, my son was born here through Stanford Baby. We lived downtown there in El Camino way. It was a wonderful time. So that was, I had my bicycle, budget was very close. The croissant every Sunday morning from the well-known shopping center around here was kind of the deluxe, but I enjoyed the time tremendously.
What is
good entry into the US, and subsequent. I've lived 1 year over on the East Coast in Nutley, the headquarters of Roche, when I was integrating Syntex, and I was part of the US senior management team on the commercial side. I did a stint over for 1 year at Roche Nutley, which was the headquarter of the group then on the US side. So I've had multiple entry points. I recently had to see what I'm doing in terms of visits to US. I think I've come here to America in total about 200 times over the last 30 years. So the airlines loved me. They still do, although come now less frequently.
What is it like now when you come back? Do you see a big change, and is it a change that you enjoy?
Oh, yeah. Well, there are all sorts of aspects. I mean, you do by all means. I mean, here it's still perfectly all right. I must say sometimes, the entry into your beloved country is a bit painful. This time, it was even more painful than others. I was waiting, 2.5 hours when I came in last week, in front of the immigration. Wasn't organized that well. Usually, San Francisco airport is much better than JFK. Now it seems to be the other way around. I have no clue why, but some of us really got held up there badly. So that's the first kind of a welcome, which, if you come out of a 12 hours, plane flight from Europe, which sort of bothers you a bit. But afterwards, you put it aside, and then, it's still fine. I still love coming here, particularly again on this side of the continent.
Thank you. I guess what I was getting at is what type of energy do you feel now? Because from then to now, so many tech companies have come in. Like when you lived there, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have LinkedIn. We didn't have, Google? Did we have Google?
No. What you had, and very importantly at that time, I recall, because I, helped a bit there, you had Hewlett Packard, for instance. No, all these were away, But I even took, informatics classes at Stanford, and I could see what business might be coming. So one of my first contacts, I programmed an ATM at that one point in time as an exercise. Now I'm hardly able to deal with my iPhone, but that's a different topic. So that was only developing technology. At that time, Hewlett Packard were important, and I think they donated money to Stanford, of which we benefited, Fairchild. even had a building there. So it was very early, but you know, you could see, you could sense it. Now it's becoming too big. I don't have that many contacts anymore in the old Standford world. I just noticed that every time I go through the cruise through the campus, which I do almost every year, additional buildings have come up, and I mean, it's a powerhouse, Standford. No, so in that regard. You notice also some other things on the San Francisco streets we do not wish to talk about, which I see when I attend the JP Morgan on Union Square. But that's a different aspect, and maybe more particular to San Francisco, not down here.
No, but I think it's very sad because I think San Francisco is being internationally tarnished because you have this JP Morgan meeting annually and the same people come. And I was at that meeting and had the privilege of speaking with many people, and their concern was that they shouldn't continue to have the JP Morgan meeting in San Francisco if they don't clean up the streets. I mean, I myself drove by one morning on the way to a meeting and saw a gentleman on the side of the road getting dressed.
Yes.
And I realized that was his bedroom.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what the solution is, but clearly San Francisco is getting a mark against it because of the situation.
Yes, and it's a pity, you know, because I love the city. I love coming back here every time. Of course, it's not up to me to make any judgments. I don't have sufficient information. But I think it's a pity that a city like San Francisco is unable to somehow deal with this situation. I'm sure this would be doable. I'm sure there would be programs around where they do it. I don't know whether the city per se attracts these kind of people. I also see them that some of them are not even, they're homeless, you know, but they're also not well treated medically, you know. I think we see psychotic people out there in the street.
I hear there's a lot of
Oh, there is. I think you don't have to be a doctor to see that this could also be treated better. Again, it's not up to me to judge, but I think it's unnecessary if I can give that whatever advice. And it's a pity because I love the city, really. I love the area.
We all do, but I worry that if something isn't done now, we will have we'll be plagued by serious illnesses that will stem from the insanity on those streets.
Could well be.
So we just have to hope for the best and hope that somehow the city does something about it.
Yes, I think it would be to its benefit. Absolutely. I mean, you're right. Like even the hygiene sometimes is a problem. One of my friends out of government made a point there about being afraid of walking on some of the sidewalks for that reason. But again, you know, I guess we leave it at that.
Anyway, the question I asked you earlier, I was hoping that you were able to observe the difference in like the traffic and the craziness. So you're here basically on the weekend.
Yes.
And so you're not privy to what goes on during the week here because of the new companies.
That's
in terms
true.
of traffic and other things.
That's true. Of course, I observe the traffic here, which is also substantial if you drive up your sandhill, so there is clear traffic. I have occasionally meet one or the other of the venture capital groups here with whom we have co-invested in the past, but mostly coming here is, I admit it, is a bit of, you know, post JPM, you know, kind of recover, recharge the batteries, and just enjoy. I mean, it's also, as I said, a bit of a homecoming thing here. I do not feel as a tourist, although I'm a tourist, but it's at least a person who comes back home. And I had this relationship with Professor Schutter, that was in a routine. We're going to have dinner together, and we're fighting when Stu was going to pay the bill, and, you know, we had his favorite restaurant. So there were good reasons to come back here, which still are. So traffic, we put traffic aside.
Okay, now that I've raked you over the coals for almost an hour, Markus, I am going to ask you, what haven't I asked you that you'd like to leave with my viewers?
Well, I think you have really, thank you so much. I mean, you have asked me a number of very important questions. I think you seem to know reasonably very well what I'm doing personally, what the field is up to. I think we have covered many aspects. I think one of the things is just to reiterate that what I do, venture capitalist, is an obligation, is a responsibility, but it's also highly exciting. You know, you have to hopefully do something with money, but at the same time also do something, you know, good for mankind. So it's not always that easy. And I would just want to make sure that, you know, the VCs, as they're being called, are not seen as the bad guys who move in, you know, eat up a company and then jump to the next place. At least that's not how I see it. So it's fun to be in, and occasionally coming also over here to enjoy that time is great. So I think you have covered the area quite nicely.
Not yet.
Okay.
One more.
Oh wow.
What message do you have for a young person here in the United States with a brilliant idea for a new product or some cutting-edge treatment?
Yes.
What message do you have for them if they're trying to acquire funds so they could take their idea to the next level?
So you talk about young people already have kind of accomplished.
Yes.
I would say first of all.
Who has something, but they need the funds.
Okay. First thing is, and I think that's very important over here, and you're very good at that also back in Switzerland, education. Get a good education. Get as good an education as you can. And then, yes, be bold, which they do over here. That's one of the advantages, some of the young people have over here. Be bold and have a good business plan. Get good advisors who have experience on board and see whether and how they can help. But I think in that regard, continue. Many good young people over here have obviously done what is now done. Avoid overselling. There are some very bad examples, with a diagnostic company, built up by a young lady who clearly much overdid it. So this is a bad example. So don't fall into the pitch of just wanting to make money or, cheat people. That should not be. So it has to be based on substance, based on conviction, based on dedication, and then go. Seek good advice, and maybe you have to tell your story 20 times, 30 times. But I think that's what many young people do. I had one of our recent portfolio companies, a very good scientist, young lady from Algeria, but tank. You couldn't stop her. She was going. The company, in the meantime, after 2 years of holding, got acquired by Boehringer Ingelheim. She's now a part of Boehringer Ingelheim, and she says, I'm going to tell them what I'm going to do, although she got acquired. Want to have my own name, do this, do that. Of course, I shouldn't overdo it, but, be bold, but don't oversell. Okay. And have a good educational background. Don't too broad initially, have a couple of areas of expertise on which you can hopefully build your discoveries or your assets.
Markus, thank you so much.
Well, Jennylyn, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you. You can see, I love what I'm doing, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and talk a bit about my life, which I have never done in that fashion. I've never reflected in a full sense. So you forced me a bit, you triggered a bit my kind of introspection. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I'm so thrilled to get your story to share with my viewers because, like I said, it's my goal to share the success stories of people like yourself to hopefully encourage another person. Thank you so much for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. Thank you, Renee, my camera person, without whom we could not do this. And a great big thank you to the Rosewood Hotel for allowing us the privilege of this beautiful ambiance for the interview. I can't imagine doing it anywhere else. And once again, thank you for watching Conversations with Jennylyn, and I will see you next time. Thank you.
Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.